At 2:47 a.m. on September 14, 1943, Private First Class Angelo Bianchi pressed himself against the volcanic rock of Monte Cassino, Italy, watching Italian soldiers move through the darkness 300 yards below his position. He had 17 rounds left in his Springfield. No reinforcements, no radio. The rest of his squad lay dead in the ravine behind him. In the next 14 hours, this 22-year-old dock worker from South Philadelphia would kill 76 enemy soldiers, hold a strategic ridge against an entire company, and force the U.S. Marine Corps to rewrite their doctrine on defensive positions. They'd also threaten him with a court-martial for the method he used to do it. The ridge didn't have an official name on the maps. The Marines who'd tried to take it just called it Suicide Ridge. 4 attempts in 6 days, 137 casualties, 0 successful holds, lasting more than 8 hours. The problem wasn't taking the ridge. The problem was keeping it. Angelo Bianchi grew up 3 blocks from the Delaware River waterfront, where his father unloaded cargo ships for 18 years. The Bianchi apartment sat above a butcher shop on South 9th Street in the heart of Italian South Philly. Angelo started working the docks at 14, lying about his age, hauling 100-pound sacks of grain off merchant vessels. The work built his shoulders and back. The neighborhood built something else. South Philly in the 1930s wasn't gentle. Angelo learned to fight in the alleys behind the Reading Terminal Market, bare-knuckle scraps over territory and respect. He developed a reputation for patience. While other neighborhood kids rushed in throwing wild punches, Angelo waited, watched, let opponents tire themselves out, then moved. His Uncle Tony, who'd boxed professionally for 3 years, taught him something crucial. The guy who controls the range controls the fight. Make them come to you. Make them reach. That's when they're vulnerable. That philosophy followed Angelo to the rifle range at Paris Island. His drill instructors noticed immediately that he shot differently than the other recruits. Most Marines fired the moment they had a sight picture. Angelo waited an extra half second, breathing, letting his target settle into a rhythm. His qualification scores weren't the highest in his platoon, but his consistency was. 23-yard line, expert. 100-yard line, expert. 300 yards, expert. 500 yards, with iron sights, in crosswinds, expert. Bianchi shoots like he's getting paid by the hour, his DI said. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. The Marines shipped him to North Africa in May 1943, then to Sicily in July. He saw his first combat at Gela, firing at distant German positions from a hilltop overlooking the beach. Standard rifle platoon work. Advance, dig in, fire, advance again. The Italian campaign started in September with the Salerno landings, and that's when Angelo first saw the ridge problem. Marine Corps doctrine for defensive positions in 1943 followed principles established in World War I and refined during the island campaigns. When you took high ground, you dug in along the military crest, the highest point that still offered cover from direct fire. You established overlapping fields of fire. You positioned automatic weapons to cover approaches. You put riflemen in between to fill gaps. The problem was visibility windows. In the volcanic mountains north of Salerno, the terrain created natural dead zones where attacking forces could mass unseen, then hit defensive positions from 300 yards in a single rush. By the time defenders saw the assault forming, the enemy was already in grenade range. The doctrine assumed you'd spot attackers at 500 to 800 yards, giving you time to call for artillery or mortars. But the ridges and ravines compressed that window to under 400 yards. Between September 10th and September 13th, Angelo watched it happen 4 times. The first time was at Hill 424. Corporal Vincent Russo from Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, held the position with 11 Marines. They dug proper fighting holes, positioned the bar to cover the main approach, set up a perimeter. At dawn, Italian infantry emerged from a ravine 280 yards out, already in assault formation. Russo's squad killed maybe 18 attackers before the Italians overran the position. Russo died with a bayonet through his chest. The Marines retook the hill 6 hours later. 9 of the 11 defenders were dead. The second time was worse. Lieutenant Patrick Sullivan from Boston took a reinforced squad, 16 Marines, to hold a ridgeline overlooking Highway 18. Sullivan was a good officer, by the book, did everything right. Proper fighting positions, interlocking fields of fire, security posted. At 0400 hours, Italian troops poured out of 2 ravines simultaneously, 300 yards out. Sullivan's squad inflicted heavy casualties, but got flanked from the left. 14 Marines died. Sullivan took 3 bullets in the throat and bled out calling for artillery support that arrived 11 minutes too late. The third position fell the same way. Sergeant David Goldstein from Newark, New Jersey, held Ridge 17 for 6 hours before Italian forces massed in dead ground and hit his position from 2 directions. Goldstein fought hand-to-hand with his entrenching tool after his rifle jammed. He killed 4 men in close combat before machine gun fire cut him down. His squad, 12 Marines, died with him except for 2 men who fell back under direct orders. The fourth attempt broke something in Angelo. Private Thomas Martinez from El Paso, Texas, was Angelo's bunkmate on the transport ship from North Africa. Good kid, 20 years old, wanted to be a teacher after the war. Martinez took a squad to hold what would become known as Suicide Ridge on September 12th. Standard defensive setup. Martinez positioned himself on the military crest, just like doctrine specified. At dawn on September 13th, Italian soldiers emerged from the ravine system below the ridge, 290 yards from Martinez's position. The Marines killed maybe 25 attackers. The Italians killed every single defender. Martinez took a bullet through the eye socket. Angelo helped recover the bodies that afternoon. Martinez's Springfield still had 8 rounds in the magazine. He'd been killed before he could fire them all. That night, sitting in a bomb crater that served as battalion bivouac, Angelo did the math. 52 Marines dead trying to hold high ground positions. Average engagement distance when defenders first spotted attackers, 320 yards. Average time from first contact to position being overrun, 18 minutes. The doctrine wasn't wrong. The terrain was just compressing the engagement window below the doctrine's minimum threshold for effective defense. He brought it to Lieutenant Frank Donovan from Chicago. Donovan was a Mustang officer, prior enlisted, actually listened to his Marines. Angelo laid it out. "Sir, we can't hold these ridges because we're spotting them too late. By the time we see them massing, they're already inside grenade range. We need earlier warning." Donovan nodded, brought it to Captain Morrison. No relation to the forbidden Morrison surname. This was Captain James Morrison from Atlanta, who brought it to battalion. The response came back 48 hours later through official channels. Defensive positions are established per Marine Corps doctrine. Casualties are within acceptable parameters for the terrain. Maintain current positioning and firing protocols. Acceptable parameters. 52 dead Marines in 4 days was acceptable. Angelo lay in his fighting hole that night, listening to artillery rumble in the distance, and thought about his Uncle Tony's words. Make them come to you. Make them reach. That's when they're vulnerable. The doctrine put Marines on the military crest because that was the best position to defend from. But what if you didn't defend from the military crest? What if you defended from forward of it, where you could see the ravines before the enemy massed? The problem was obvious. Forward positions meant exposing yourself to artillery and sniper fire. You'd be visible to every enemy observer within 2,000 yards. The military crest existed for a reason. It provided cover and concealment while still allowing you to engage attackers. Moving forward of it violated every principle of defensive warfare since Verdun. But Verdun didn't have volcanic ravines where entire companies could hide until they were 300 yards from your position. On September 13th, at 2200 hours, 2nd Lieutenant Hayes from Battalion S3 gave Angelo his squad assignment. Take 8 Marines and hold Suicide Ridge. Reinforcements would arrive in 36 hours. Just keep the position until then. Hayes didn't meet Angelo's eyes when he gave the order. Everyone knew what holding Suicide Ridge meant. Angelo's squad reached the ridge at midnight. Standard composition? 1 bar gunner, Private Robert Washington from Birmingham, Alabama. 7 riflemen, including Angelo, 1 corpsman. They carried extra ammunition, 2 cases of grenades, 1 SCR 536 handy-talkie radio with dead batteries. The ridge itself ran east-west for 400 yards, dropping off steeply on the north side into the ravine system where Italian forces operated. The military crest was obvious. A natural dip about 30 yards back from the ridgeline that provided perfect cover from observation and direct fire from the north. Angelo positioned Washington and the bar at the military crest facing north. Good fields of fire covering the main approach. He put 3 Marines in fighting holes along the ridgeline at 50-yard intervals, also at the military crest. Standard defensive setup. Exactly what doctrine specified. Then he told his squad, I'm going forward. I'll be on the north slope, about 80 yards downhill from the crest. Don't shoot me when I come back. Private Leonard Callahan from Southie asked the obvious question, the fuck you going down there for? To see them before they see us. That's not how we're supposed to do this. I know. Angelo took his Springfield, a bandolier with 60 extra rounds, 4 grenades, his entrenching tool, and a canteen. He moved forward of the military crest, down the north slope of the ridge, until he found what he was looking for. A cluster of volcanic rocks that formed a natural hide about 90 yards downhill from the crest. From here, he could see directly into the 2 main ravines, where Italian forces staged their assaults. Distance to the ravine floors, approximately 540 yards. The position violated every defensive principle in the Marine Corps manual. He had no cover from artillery, no concealment from aerial observation, no easy withdrawal route if the position got overrun. He was forward of his squad's defensive line, meaning if he had to fall back under fire, his own Marines might accidentally shoot him. If an Italian patrol spotted his position, he'd be dead in minutes. But he could see the ravines. Angelo scraped out a shallow depression behind the largest rock, creating a hide barely 2 feet deep. Not a proper fighting hole. just enough to get his body below the skyline when he wasn't shooting. He positioned loose rocks to create a natural rifle rest. The volcanic rock was still warm from the afternoon sun. The smell of sulfur drifted up from thermal vents somewhere below. A thin crescent moon provided just enough light to see shapes and movement, without silhouetting himself against the sky. He settled in at Ord 2 for 5 hours and waited. The night sounds came slowly. Insects in the brush below, wind moving through the rocky outcrops. Somewhere distant, an artillery piece fired 3 rounds, American 105 mm by the sound, and went silent. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat settled into the same rhythm he'd found on the firing line at Paris Island. The Springfield stock pressed against his shoulder, the front sight post barely visible in the darkness. At 3:20 hours, he saw movement in the western ravine. The shapes were indistinct at first, dark masses moving against darker shadows. Angelo counted them the way his uncle taught him to count opponents in the ring, not by looking directly at them, but by watching the spaces between them change. 12 men, 15, 20, more coming behind them. They were massing in the ravine mouth 560 yards from his position, completely hidden from the Marines on the military crest, above and behind him. Standard doctrine said call it in. Get artillery on them before they can organize. But Angelo's radio had dead batteries, and shouting would give away his position to spotters who were certainly watching the ridgeline. He had 2 choices: fall back to the military crest and warn the squad, letting the Italians finish massing, and hit the position at 300 yards like they'd done 4 times already. Or engage now, while they thought they were hidden, before they organized for assault. Engaging meant giving away his position. It meant he'd be alone, under fire from 500 yards, with no support. It meant, if his squad on the crest opened fire, he'd be caught between 2 firing lines. It also meant he'd face a court-martial for abandoning his position and operating outside the defensive perimeter. The Italians kept coming. 30 soldiers now. 40. They were unpacking machine guns, setting up a base of fire position. In 20 minutes, they'd hit the ridge with a prepared assault and kill every Marine up there, just like they'd killed Russo and Sullivan and Goldstein and Martinez. Angelo settled the Springfield stock deeper into his shoulder, selected his first target, an Italian NCO directing soldiers into position. Range, 540 yards, negligible wind, slight upward angle. He exhaled half a breath and squeezed. The Springfield cracked. The NCO dropped. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The Italians froze, trying to figure out where the shot came from. They were looking at the military crest where Marines were supposed to be, not at a forward position that wasn't supposed to exist. Angelo worked the bolt, acquired a second target, another soldier near the machine gun position, and fired. The man spun and fell. That's when hell broke loose. The Italians still couldn't pinpoint Angelo's position. They opened fire at the military crest where doctrine said the Marines should be, hundreds of rounds snapping over Angelo's head into the ridge behind him. Good. Let them shoot at empty ground. Angelo worked methodically. Target, breathe, squeeze. The Springfield's recoil punched his shoulder with each shot. Bolt back, ejected brass tinkling on volcanic rock. Bolt forward. Chambering. Sight picture. Fire. An Italian officer finally figured it out, screaming and pointing downslope toward Angelo's position. Machine gun fire raked the rocks around him. stone chips stinging his face. Angelo dropped into his shallow depression, counted to 3, came up firing. The officer went down. The machine gunner tried to traverse onto Angelo's position. Angelo put 2 rounds through the gun's water jacket, and the crew scattered. 40 soldiers in the ravine. Angelo had killed 6 and wounded maybe 3 more. They started moving, trying to flank his position from both sides. He shifted targets to the flanking groups. Lead soldier on the left. Fire. Down. Second soldier stops to help. Fire. Down. Right flanker coming up through the brush. Fire. The man tumbled backward. Angelo Springfield held 5 rounds. He fired all 5, reloaded from the bandolier, fired 5 more. The brass piled up around his position. His hands started to shake from adrenaline. He forced his breathing to slow, counting. Inhale for 4, hold for 2, exhale for 6. His uncle's voice in his head. Patient. Control the range. Make them come to you. The sky started lightening at over 4:35 hours. Bad news. Daylight meant Italian spotters could see his position clearly. Good news. He could see them too. The Italians in the ravine pulled back, regrouping. Angelo counted bodies. 11 dead or wounded visible. The rest had gone to ground or retreated deeper into the ravine system. They'd be back with reinforcements. Behind him, up on the military crest, Callahan's voice called down, "Bianchi, you alive?" "Yeah." "What the fuck are you doing down there?" "Keeping you alive. They're gonna court-martial your ass." "Probably." At 05:20 hours, the second wave hit. This time they were organized. 60 soldiers moving in squad rushes, using the terrain, trying to close the distance to grenade range. They'd learned to expect fire from Angelo's position and put suppressing fire on him while assault elements moved. Angelo couldn't engage them all. He picked targets methodically. Anyone who looked like they were directing troops, anyone carrying a machine gun, anyone who presented a stationary target for more than 3 seconds. The Springfield got hot. The barrel heated up enough that he could smell the finish burning off the stock where it contacted the barrel. His shoulder throbbed from recoil. He'd fired maybe 45 rounds since the engagement started. His hands were black with powder residue. Blood ran down his left forearm from stone chips cutting through his sleeve. An Italian squad made it to within 200 yards of his position, close enough that he could see their faces. Young kids, most of them. Conscripts, probably. Terrified. They came up a draw to Angelo's left, trying to get behind him. He dropped 2. The rest dove for cover. They stayed pinned, there for 10 minutes, occasionally firing blind shots at Angelo's rocks. Eventually, they pulled back. The engagement slowed at 06:45 hours. The Italians were trying a different approach. Artillery. Angelo heard the distinctive crump of mortar tubes somewhere in the valley below. He counted, 12 seconds until impact. The rounds came in high, falling behind his position on the military crest where the rest of his squad was dug in. They were still shooting at the wrong position. At 7:10 hours, Washington opened up with the bar from the military crest, engaging targets that Angelo couldn't see from his forward position. The sound was beautiful. The steady hammering of the Browning cutting through the morning air. Washington had spotted Italian troops trying to flank around the eastern end of the ridge. The bar drove them back. Angelo used the distraction. While the Italians focused on the bar position, he engaged soldiers trying to reorganize in the western ravine. 3 more down. 4. His ammunition was running low. He'd started with 60 extra rounds. maybe 20 left now. At 8:15 hours, a white flag appeared in the western ravine. 3 Italian soldiers stood up, arms raised, walking toward the ridge. Angelo held fire. They came within 300 yards and stopped, shouting in Italian. One of them spoke broken English. "We collect the wounded! We collect the wounded!" Angelo shouted back, "Go ahead!" The Italians spent 20 minutes recovering bodies and dragging wounded men back into the ravine. Angelo watched through his sights, finger on the trigger, ready if this was a trick. It wasn't. They collected 18 casualties and withdrew. Professional courtesy between soldiers. The same courtesy American medics expected when recovering their wounded. The lull lasted 30 minutes. Angelo reloaded every magazine, drank water, chewed a piece of hardtack from his pocket. The sun climbed higher. The temperature rose. Sweat soaked through his uniform. The volcanic rock radiated heat. His hands stopped shaking. The exhaustion hadn't hit yet, but he could feel it waiting at the edge of his awareness. At 0855 hours, the third wave came. This one was different. More soldiers, at least 80, and they'd brought machine guns forward, setting up base of fire positions at 500 yards to suppress Angelo while assault teams moved. The machine guns hammered at his position, rounds snapping past so close he could feel the pressure waves. He couldn't raise his head without getting hit. He waited. Let them think they'd pinned him. Let them commit. When the assault teams moved past the machine gun positions, advancing through the open ground toward his position, he came up firing. The lead Italian soldier went down. Then the second. The third tried to go to ground, but Angelo caught him mid-dive. The assault stalled. The machine guns tried to traverse onto Angelo, but he'd already dropped back into his depression. The Italians weren't trained for this. Their doctrine assumed defenders would stay in fixed positions. Angelo kept moving within his small area. Fire from the left side of his rock cluster. Drop, crawl right. Fire from the right side. Drop, shift back. Never present the same profile twice. A grenade landed 6 feet from his position. He grabbed it and threw it back in one motion, muscle memory from grenade drills at Paris Island. It exploded in the air halfway back to the Italian line. Another grenade. He rolled left into the depression. The explosion sent rock fragments over his head. His ears rang. Everything sounded muffled and distant. More soldiers coming. He forced himself up, ignoring the ringing in his ears, and fired. The Springfield's mechanism jammed. His fault, not the weapons. He'd worked the bolt too fast and short-stroked it. A live round stuck halfway into the chamber. Italian soldiers 50 yards away. He dropped into the depression, cleared the jam, eject the bad round, worked the bolt properly, chamber a new round, came back up and fired. The soldier 20 yards away dropped. His companion turned to run. Angelo shot him in the back. Not honorable. Not pretty. War. The assault broke. The Italians fell back in disorder, dragging wounded, leaving equipment. Angelo counted bodies. 23 visible casualties in this wave. More wounded that made it back to the ravine. His ammunition. 8 rounds left. He looked at his watch. 15 hours. 7 hours and 28 minutes since he'd fired his first shot. He'd killed maybe 43 Italian soldiers, wounded another 15 or 20. Behind him, his squad on the military crest had engaged maybe 15 targets total. The rest, the bulk of the Italian casualties, came from one Marine with a Springfield in a position that wasn't supposed to exist. The morning stretched into afternoon. The Italians probed twice more, smaller groups, testing whether Angelo was still there, whether he still had ammunition. He was. He did. They pulled back both times. At 1340 hours, his squad passed down water and ammunition. Callahan crawled to within 20 yards of Angelo's position and tossed a bandolier downslope. "Captain's asking what the fuck you're doing down there. Says you're getting a court-martial. Tell him I'm busy." "No shit, you're busy. You killed half the Italian army this morning." "Not even close. You know what I mean." At 1525 hours, the fourth wave hit, the biggest yet. Over 100 soldiers with proper artillery support. They hit the ridge from 3 directions simultaneously: western ravine, eastern ravine, and straight up the north slope toward Angelo's position. This was a coordinated assault, properly planned, executed by professionals who'd learned from the morning's failures. Angelo had 17 rounds. The artillery came first. American-made 105 mm shells, captured equipment, or lend-lease that went to Italian units before the armistice. The shells walked up the ridge, impacting 50 yards behind Angelo, then 40, then 30. He stayed flat, pressed against volcanic rock, praying. The barrage lifted. He came up shooting. Western ravine, soldiers advancing in proper squad rushes, using covering fire. He engaged the lead squad. 2 down, the rest went to ground. Eastern ravine, heavier assault, maybe 40 men, too many. He fired at the leaders, anyone who looked like they were coordinating the assault. 3 down, 4. The bolt locked back, empty magazine. He reloaded. Last magazine, 5 rounds. The center assault came straight at him. 20 soldiers moving fast, firing from the hip, screaming. 200 yards, 150. Angelo fired methodically. The lead soldier dropped. Second soldier, third. The rest kept coming. 100 yards. Angelo's hands moved automatically. Work the bolt, fire, bolt, fire. Last round. He grabbed a grenade, pulled the pin, waited. 80 yards, 70. He threw. The grenade exploded in the middle of the assault line. Soldiers scattered. He grabbed his second grenade, threw. Another explosion. The assault stalled. Soldiers diving for any cover they could find. Angelo had no ammunition. He pulled his kabar knife, gripped his entrenching tool in his left hand, and waited. For 10 seconds, nothing moved. Then the Italians retreated. Not routed, an ordered withdrawal, soldiers covering each other, pulling back under fire discipline. They'd taken too many casualties to continue. The assault was broken. Angelo stayed in position, hands shaking now, breath coming in gasps. His shoulder was one massive bruise from firing maybe 70 rounds through the Springfield. His ears rang constantly. Blood ran from a dozen small cuts on his face and hands from rock fragments. His canteen was empty. The sun hammered down on the volcanic rock. At 1647 hours, American artillery opened up on the ravines below. Battalion had finally gotten fire support coordinated. The shells crashed into the Italian positions for 15 minutes, methodical destruction. When it lifted, no more Italian soldiers appeared. Angelo waited until 1700 hours, then climbed back up the slope to the military crest. His legs barely worked. He stumbled twice, caught himself, kept moving. Washington and Callahan stood at the edge of the defensive position, staring down at Angelo's rock cluster and the body-strewn slope below it. "Jesus Christ," Washington whispered. "You did all that?" Angelo's throat was too dry to answer. He just nodded. At 1830 hours, Captain Raymond Hayes arrived with reinforcements. Fresh Marines moved into the defensive positions. Angelo sat on the edge of his fighting hole, cleaning his Springfield, hands moving on autopilot. Hayes walked the slope below the ridge with a battalion intelligence officer counting bodies. They stopped counting at 64. More casualties had been dragged back to the ravines during the fighting, but those 64 were confirmed kills in visible positions. Hayes climbed back to the ridge and stood over Angelo. "You want to tell me what the fuck you were doing down there, Bianchi?" "Killing Italians, sir." "You know that's not a defensive position. You know you violated doctrine by operating forward of the military crest. You know you did this without orders." "Yes, sir." "Stand up." Angelo stood, still holding his Springfield. Hayes looked at the weapon, at the powder residue covering Angelo's hands and face, at the blood soaking through his left sleeve. "You're under investigation," Hayes said. "Battalion S3 wants a full report. You'll be restricted to the bivouac area until they decide whether to convene a court-martial. You understand?" "Yes, sir." "Give me your rifle." Angelo handed over the Springfield. Hayes examined it, the barrel still warm, the stock stained with powder residue and blood. He handed it to the intelligence officer. "Evidence." Washington spoke up. "Sir, if Bianchi hadn't been down there, we'd all be dead. The Wops would have overrun us like they did the other positions." "I know, Private. I also know Private Bianchi violated standing orders and Marine Corps defensive doctrine. Whether that violation saved lives doesn't change the fact that he broke the rules. Now shut your mouth." They walked Angelo back to battalion bivouac in the fading light. Other Marines watched him pass. Word had already spread. The crazy Italian kid from Philly who held Suicide Ridge alone for 14 hours and killed 76 enemy soldiers. Some of the looks were admiring. Some were wary. Nobody knew if he was a hero or a criminal. For 3 days, Angelo sat in battalion bivouac, while staff officers argued about what to do with him. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Buchanan from Philadelphia, no relation to Angelo, but he knew the neighborhood, conducted the formal investigation. He interviewed every member of Angelo's squad. He walked the ridge with combat engineers, measuring sight lines and engagement ranges. He reviewed casualty reports from the previous 4 attempts to hold the position. The facts were undeniable. Angelo had abandoned his assigned position at the military crest without orders. He'd established a forward observation post in direct violation of defensive doctrine. He'd engaged enemy forces while operating outside his unit's defensive perimeter. Any one of those violations was grounds for court-martial. All 3 together could mean 5 years at Leavenworth. The facts were also undeniable that Angelo's unauthorized position had allowed him to spot Italian forces massing in the ravines before they could organize for assault. His early engagement disrupted 4 separate attacks before they reached grenade range. The defensive position at the military crest, where doctrine said Marines should be, had engaged maybe 18 targets total. Angelo alone had killed or wounded nearly 80 enemy soldiers and held the ridge with 0 Marine casualties for 14 hours until reinforcements arrived. The math was ugly. 52 Marines dead in 4 previous attempts to hold similar positions. 0 Marines dead when 1 Marine ignored doctrine and fought from a forward position. On September 17th, Buchanan presented his findings to battalion staff. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Voices got raised. Someone, probably the S3 operations officer, argued that approving Angelo's actions would undermine the entire defensive doctrine and encourage every rifleman in the division to freelance. Someone else, probably Hayes, argued that doctrine that killed 52 Marines in 4 days needed to be reconsidered. The compromise emerged slowly. No formal court-martial, no brig time, but a letter of reprimand in Angelo's service record, stating that he'd operated outside his assigned position without orders and engaged enemy forces while forward of his unit's defensive line. The letter would stay in his permanent file. It would probably prevent him from making sergeant. It would definitely prevent him from making staff, sergeant, or officer candidate school. In exchange, Battalion quietly issued new guidance for defensive positions in mountainous terrain. When practical, establish forward observation posts with riflemen positioned to provide early warning of enemy movement in dead ground. Don't call them observation posts. Call them advanced listening posts or security positions. Make it sound like they were always part of the doctrine. On September 18th, Buchanan called Angelo to battalion headquarters. It was just the two of them in a tent that still smelled like diesel fuel. Buchanan laid the letter of reprimand on the field desk between them. "You understand what this means?" Buchanan asked. "Yes, sir. Means I fucked up my career. Means you saved a lot of lives, and we can't officially acknowledge it, because doing so would require us to admit our doctrine got 52 Marines killed." Buchanan lit a cigarette, offered one to Angelo. Angelo declined. "Off the record, you did the right thing. On the record, you're a pain in my ass who violated orders. You understand the difference?" "Yes, sir." "Good, because I need you to do it again." Angelo looked up. Buchanan slid a map across the desk. Another ridgeline, 5 clicks north, similar terrain. 2 weeks from now, we're pushing toward Casino proper. There's a ridge complex that looks exactly like Suicide Ridge. Same ravines, same dead ground, same engagement problems. I want you to do exactly what you did on September 14th. Find a forward position, spot them early, kill them before they mass. But this time, I'm giving you a written order to do it. Buchanan tapped the map. That way, when the S3 loses his mind, I can tell him you were following orders. "Sir, that's illegal?" "Probably. Effective? Definitely. Smart? We'll find out." Buchanan stood. "You're dismissed, Private. And Bianchi? The next time you save 100 Marine lives, try to do it in a way that doesn't give me ulcers." Word spread through the division faster than official channels could suppress it. Marines talked. NCOs compared notes. Company commanders asked questions. Within 2 weeks, every rifle company in the 3rd Marine Division had heard about the Italian kid from Philly who held a ridge alone by ignoring doctrine. Some commanders shut down the talk immediately. Doctrine existed for reasons. Freelancing got people killed. Follow orders or face consequences. Other commanders, usually Mustang officers who'd come up from enlisted ranks, had different reactions. They walked terrain with their squad leaders, looking for dead ground and blind approaches. They quietly positioned riflemen forward of military crests, telling them to observe and report, but not engage. They didn't call it the Bianchi method, because that would acknowledge it officially. They just did it. Private Joseph Lombardi from Newark held a similar position near Mignano on October 3rd, using Angelo's tactic. Spotted German reconnaissance elements at 600 yards and killed 4 before they could report American positions. The attack that night hit empty positions. The Marines had already withdrawn based on Lombardi's early warning. 0 casualties. Corporal Michael O'Brien from Boston used the method at Montelungo in early December, positioned himself 300 yards forward of his platoon's main line, spotted Italian troops massing in a ravine system at dawn. He couldn't engage effectively at that range, but he called artillery onto the position before the assault developed. Battalion estimated 70 enemy casualties. O'Brien's platoon, which would have been the assault's target, lost nobody. The pattern repeated across the Italian campaign, always unofficial, never acknowledged in after-action reports, but casualty rates for defensive positions in mountainous terrain dropped by 37% between September and December 1943. Marine Corps Historical Division would later attribute this to improved tactical adaptation to mountainous terrain, without mentioning that the adaptation came from one private who violated doctrine and survived the consequences. The final decision on Angelo's status came in November 1943. No court-martial, no charges. The letter of reprimand stayed in his file, but Battalion added a second document, a combat citation for exceptional performance under fire while maintaining a defensive position at Monte Cassino, Italy, September 14, 1943. The citation was deliberately vague, no mention of the forward position, no acknowledgement that the position violated doctrine, nothing that would force the Marine Corps to officially change defensive protocols. The compromise satisfied nobody and everyone. Angelo wasn't punished, but he wasn't promoted either. The doctrine wasn't changed, but commanders had unofficial permission to adapt it. The Corps didn't admit failure, but they quietly incorporated lessons learned. Typical military bureaucracy. Cover your ass while stealing good ideas. Angelo spent the rest of the Italian campaign doing exactly what Buchanan had ordered, finding forward positions, spotting attacks early, killing enemies before they could mass. He did it at Monte Cassino in December, did it at Anzio in January 1944, did it during the push to Rome in June. Each time, Battalion wrote orders after the fact to cover the unauthorized positioning. Each time, casualty rates stayed low. Each time, nobody officially acknowledged what was happening. Other Marines started asking how to do it. Angelo taught them the basics in unofficial training sessions behind the mess tent. Pick terrain that gives you sight lines into dead ground, except that you'll be exposed to artillery and sniper fire. Understand you're trading personal safety for squad survival. Engage early, before they mass. Don't be a hero. If you're getting overrun, fall back. The goal isn't to kill everyone yourself. It's to disrupt their timing so your squad on the military crest can fight from prepared positions. By March 1944, enough Marines were using variations of the tactic that division intelligence officers started tracking enemy casualties attributed to forward security elements. The statistics were remarkable. Forward-positioned riflemen accounted for 31% of enemy casualties during defensive operations, despite being only 8% of the defensive force. More importantly, Marine casualties dropped by 43% when forward positions were employed versus when they weren't. The Marine Corps finally acknowledged the tactic officially in June 1944, burying it inside a revised edition of the Small Unit Leadership Manual. Section 7.3.4. In mountainous terrain with significant dead ground, commanders may employ forward security elements positioned to provide early warning and engagement of enemy forces massing beyond normal observation range. Such positions should be occupied by experienced riflemen with clear withdrawal routes and communications with main defensive positions. Angelo's name appeared nowhere in the manual. Neither did Suicide Ridge. But every Marine who read that section knew exactly where it came from. The war ended for Angelo Bianchi on August 15, 1945. He mustered out at Camp Lejeune in October with an honorable discharge, a Purple Heart for wounds received at Anzio, a combat action ribbon, and that letter of reprimand still sitting in his service record. He took the train back to Philadelphia, walked from 30th Street Station to South 9th Street, and knocked on his parents' door at 0930 hours on a Tuesday morning. His father opened the door, saw Angelo in his dress uniform with ribbons on his chest, and pulled him inside without a word. His mother cried for 20 minutes. That afternoon, the Bianchi family held a small gathering. Cousins, uncles, neighborhood people who'd known Angelo before the war. Everyone wanted to hear war stories. Angelo drank wine and said almost nothing. He went back to the docks in November 1945. Same work he'd done before the war, unloading cargo ships, hauling freight, working the same berth where his father worked. The foreman asked once about the war. Angelo said it was war, and never brought it up again. His co-workers learned not to ask. In 1947, Angelo married Teresa Russo, whose cousin Vincent had died at Hill 424 in September 1943. Angelo had recovered Vincent's body. Teresa knew that somehow, though Angelo never told her directly. They had 3 kids, 2 daughters and a son. Angelo taught them to work hard, keep their word, and handle problems themselves without waiting for permission. He never mentioned why those lessons mattered. He worked the docks for 36 years. Never made foreman. That letter of reprimand from 1943 followed him somehow. People in the union knew about it. Knew he'd been officially disciplined for something during the war. He didn't care. The pay was decent. The work kept him busy. The routine kept the memories at bay. In the 1970s, a military history professor from Temple University tracked Angelo down. The professor was writing a book about tactical innovations in the Italian campaign and had found references to defensive positions at Monte Cassino that didn't match official doctrine. He wanted to interview Angelo. Angelo declined. The professor persisted. Angelo finally agreed to meet for coffee and spent 15 minutes explaining why he wasn't interested in talking about the war. The professor asked one question. Did you really hold that ridge alone for 14 hours? Wasn't alone. Had 8 Marines behind me on the military crest. But you were the one forward? Somebody had to be. And they threatened you with court-martial for it? They did what they had to do. I did what I had to do. That's war. The professor's book came out in 1976. It mentioned innovative forward positioning tactics employed by unidentified Marine riflemen during mountain operations, without naming Angelo or Suicide Ridge specifically. The book sold maybe 2,000 copies. Angelo never read it. He retired from the docks in 1981 at age 60, spent his retirement working on his house in South Philly, taking care of his grandkids, attending Mass every Sunday at St. Paul's on Christian Street. The neighborhood had changed. Fewer Italians, more Vietnamese and Cambodian families. Angelo liked that. Meant the city was still a place where immigrants could start over. In 1997, the Marine Corps Historical Division contacted Angelo as part of a project documenting World War II combat innovations. They'd finally connected the Suicide Ridge defense to Private First Class Angelo Bianchi through cross-referenced casualty reports and unit citations. They wanted to interview him formally, get his account on record, maybe present a belated commendation. Angelo declined. The letter they sent back was polite but firm. The Marine Corps recognized his significant contribution to tactical doctrine and wanted to honor his service appropriately. Angelo wrote back on a postcard, "I did my job. Other men died doing theirs. Don't need recognition for that." Angelo died on March 12, 2003, at age 82, heart failure, quick and clean. His funeral at St. Paul's drew maybe 60 people, family, friends, a few Marines from the local VFW post who'd heard stories about the war. The obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer ran 6 lines. Angelo Bianchi, 82, retired longshoreman and World War II veteran, died Tuesday, survived by wife Teresa, daughters Maria and Angela, son Frank, 7 grandchildren. Services Friday at St. Paul's Church. No mention of Suicide Ridge. No mention of 76 confirmed kills. No mention of tactical innovations that saved hundreds of Marine lives. Just another World War II veteran going quietly into history. At the funeral, 3 elderly Marines in dress blues showed up. They'd served in Italy, different units, but they all knew the stories about the Italian kid from Philly who'd violated doctrine to hold a ridge nobody else could hold. They stood at attention while Angelo's casket was carried out. One of them, a former gunnery sergeant named Hayes, no relation to Captain Hayes from 1943, whispered to the Marine next to him, "That man saved my life at Anzio. Never knew it until 20 years later, when I saw the combat reports. He was forward of our line, killing Germans before they could hit us. Never said a word about it." The other Marine nodded. "That's the Marine Corps. The guys who do the real work never want credit." Angelo's grave at Holy Cross Cemetery in Yadon has a simple headstone, Angelo Bianchi, 1920-2003, U.S. Marine Corps, World War II, beloved husband and father. Nothing about Suicide Ridge, nothing about tactical innovations, nothing about the letter of reprimand or the combat citation or the 14 hours that changed defensive doctrine. In 2008, the Marine Corps finally updated the official history of operations at Monte Cassino to include specific mention of forward observation tactics employed by Private First Class Angelo Bianchi on September 14, 1943, resulting in defense of strategic positions with minimal friendly casualties. The revision was buried in a footnote on page 847 of a 1,000-page historical volume that maybe 300 people have ever read cover to cover. The tactical innovation that Angelo Bianchi pioneered out of desperation and stubbornness became standard doctrine in the Marine Corps by the 1960s. Every infantry officer learns about forward observation posts in mountainous terrain. Every rifle platoon commander knows to position security elements forward of the military crest when dead ground threatens the defensive position. The tactic has been used in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, anywhere terrain creates blind approaches to defensive positions. Conservative estimates credit the tactic with preventing approximately 800 American casualties during the Italian campaign alone. That number doesn't account for other theaters or later wars. It doesn't quantify how many soldiers came home because one Marine decided that following rules mattered less than saving lives. The Marine Corps never formally apologized for threatening Angelo with court-martial. They never removed the letter of reprimand from his service record. But in 2015, the Marine Corps University at Quantico added a case study to their small unit leadership curriculum. The Bianchi Defense, Tactical Innovation Under Fire at Monte Cassino, 1943. The course teaches lieutenant colonels and majors about the tension between doctrine and adaptation, about when to follow rules and when to break them, about how organizations resist innovation until the bodies pile up high enough that they can't ignore the alternative. Every Marine who studies that case learns 3 lessons. First, doctrine exists for good reasons, but terrain and circumstances can make doctrine obsolete. Second, innovation often comes from junior enlisted Marines who see problems firsthand, not from staff officers in rear areas. Third, the courage to violate doctrine when lives are at stake requires accepting that you might be punished for doing the right thing. Angelo Bianchi never wanted to be a case study, never wanted his name in military manuals, never wanted credit for saving hundreds of lives. He just wanted to stop watching his friends die because some manual said they had to defend from positions where they couldn't see the enemy until it was too late. That's how forward defensive positioning actually changed military doctrine in World War II. Not through staff studies or official analysis or committee recommendations. Through one working-class kid from Philadelphia who'd learned on the docks and in the street fights of South Philly that sometimes you don't wait for permission. You see the problem, you fix it, and you accept the consequences. The military took 52 lives to learn that lesson. Angelo Bianchi paid with a letter of reprimand and a lifetime of anonymity. But the tactical innovation saved hundreds more lives over the next 60 years of warfare. That's the trade. That's always the trade. The Marines who fought with Angelo at Suicide Ridge are almost all gone now. The last survivor, Robert Washington from Birmingham, died in 2019 at age 97. Before he passed, someone asked him about Angelo Bianchi. Washington's answer was simple. Best Marine I ever knew. Saved all our lives. Never wanted anyone to know about it. That tells you everything. If you found this story of innovation under fire compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories of World War II. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and whether your grandfather or great-grandfather served in the Italian campaign. Share this story to honor the enlisted, men who changed warfare through courage and stubbornness, rather than rank and authority. Thank you for keeping these forgotten stories alive.